Hey everybody, this is Kennedy with Hill Country Weavers, and I'm going to show you guys today real quickly how to do a basic hem stitch. We had done a tutorial before on how to do a double hem stitch, which is a little bit fancier, and I'll be sure and link that below. But this is going to be a more simple finish, something you would use just as an alternative to knots on the bottom of a scarf, or possibly if you were doing a tapestry as an alternative to knots or some other kind of finishing technique. So I've set up the loom with some bright green waste yarn, and that's so that we can see a clear difference between the waste yarn and the weft yarn. You want to make sure there's some good contrast there so you don't accidentally catch your waste yarn in with the weft yarn when you're doing your hem stitching. So the most important thing, we're going to make sure that we leave a long tail if we're going to be doing the hem stitch with our weft yarn, which we are today. If you want, you can also do this with an accent yarn, something that you add later, in which case you don't need to leave a long tail like this. And you can do this on or off the loom. We did our previous hem stitching tutorial off the loom if you want to see what that looks like, but the technique is basically the same. So I'm going to leave a long tail, and I want to leave this out to the side of the loom that is towards my dominant hand. So I'm measuring out about 3 times the width of the loom. 3 to 4 is good. If you're weaving a wider piece, you may want to go more towards a little too much as opposed to too little. And I'm going to leave that towards my right hand because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you would want to leave it towards your left hand because it's always easier to work this moving away from your dominant hand. So just make sure that you do have that extra yarn and that that's not being woven in with your weft. I'm going to work a few picks before we get started of plain weave, just to give us a base to work against. You probably want to do maybe an inch or so of this before you get started. So I'm ready to do my hem stitching. I've worked a few picks of plain weave, and my yarn is hanging out to the right side of the loom, which is my dominant hand. You're going to need a tapestry needle for this. You can use any kind of tapestry needle that you like. You just want to make sure that it's not so big that when you pierce the work with the needle that it creates a big hole there. So don't go for something ginormous, but other than that you're pretty good. We're going to thread our tapestry needle. And what we're doing when we're making a hem stitch is we're actually making what's called a half hitch. If you've done something like a friendship bracelet before, you've probably made these. It's a loop that's reversed. So when you pull it tight from both ends, it tightens up and snugs really good. But you can release it and it will loosen up. So if there's a trick to hem stitching, it's being sure that you're pulling these loops pretty tight. Because remember, they are replacing a knot. So we're going to start by doing just a little locking stitch on the edge. We're going to do a single half hitch around just the edge thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little loop with the yarn, and I'm going to just lift it up right here, make a little loop, and then I want to come just around this outermost thread. So like that. So by passing over the thread, by pulling it straight down and passing over it, I'm going to create that little half hitch. Now I'm going to decide how many threads I want to work over. So for this hem stitch, I'm going to work in 4 threads and up 2 threads. And you can do up 3 threads, you can do over 4 threads, 5 threads, just over 2, depending on the look that you want. The more threads that you work over, the more visible the hem stitch is going to be. If you do it fairly small in small bundles, it'll be relatively invisible and lay pretty flat. So like I said, we're going over 4, so I'm going to count 4 warp threads, and then I'm going to count up 2 weft threads, and that's where I'm going to bring my needle out. I'm going to wrap again, I'm going to create this little loop. I'm going to wrap around the outside of the work for this first one, and I'm going to make sure that when I come back out, so I'm just going behind the 4 directly above where my waste yarn is, and I'm passing over the thread that I just came out the front of the work with. And that's again creating this little half hitch loop, which I'm going to tighten down. I'm going to go back into that exact same hole that I just came out of. So you'll have come out of it and you'll be going in and out of it a couple of times here. So we're going to go straight back in, and then I'm going to go behind the work. I'm going to go over 4 warp threads and up 2 weft threads again. So we're coming over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm coming up 1, 2, and that's where I'm going to come out. I'm going to give that another little tug to pull it tight, and then again, that same hole that I just went into, I'm going to go in again, and I'm going to come straight behind those 4 weft threads. So instead of going over and up, I'm just going to go over, behind, and straight out. And that's going to be where I'm going to create that next loop. And when I do this, I want to make sure again that I'm coming over this piece of yarn above so that I'm creating that little half hitch loop. You can see it'll be tightened down again right here, and that little snug bit there is what's going to hold your thread. So again, we're going to go behind 4 threads and up 2 threads. We're going to come out of the work, and then we're going to come back down again, exact same hole. We're going to go in and behind 4 weft threads, so straight across behind those 4 weft threads, and you want to pull over the strand that just came out towards the front of your work. That's going to create your little loop. We're going to pull that tight, and then you're ready to go back down into the same hole that you just came out of. So you'll notice as you're working that this is going to create some little holes in the piece, and you may see those above as well depending on how loosely it's woven. So the more tightly you weave, the less you'll notice that, but if you're not sure which hole to go into, look for the ones that are a little bit more open like that. Alright, so now I want to show you guys working from the other direction. So this would be like when you get to the other side of the weaving and you're ready to do your hem stitching back towards the other side. So you're going to be doing the exact same thing, but instead of going above yourself for 2 threads, we're going to go below ourselves 2 threads. So always think you're going to be eating into the actual finished weaving. So you want to take a little bite in the finished weaving. This is also how you're going to work a hem stitch left-handed. I'm going to show you how to do that here, but if you're working right-handed, it's the same thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be coming into the work just like I was before. So in this case, I'm going below, and I'm going to go over 4 threads and then again in 2 threads, just like that, and we'll pull that through. So again, the only difference is that you're going to be working down into the work. And if you're left-handed, this is how you would be doing your hem stitch. Normally, you just might be working up instead of down. So I've come out to the front side. I'm going to come back around those 4 threads that I'm wrapping. And I want to make sure, again, as always, that I am pulling over this thread. So the important thing to remember is that you're creating a little backwards half hitch loop here. So I'm going to pull it tight, and I'm going to go straight back in the same hole. We're going down 2 threads, over 4 threads. 1, 2, 3, 4, down 1, 2, and I'm coming straight out. Remember when you're going into the work at this angle like this that you're not wrapping the yarn. So the only time you're making those loops is at the very bottom of the work. So I'm going back. I'm going to come in to that same hole behind 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to make sure I'm passing over my thread to create that loop. I'm going to pull through and pull tight. So the only difference between doing this at the bottom of the work and the end of the work and the front of the work at the beginning is that you're going to be working either below you or above you depending on where your weft threads are. And the only difference between doing this left-handed and right-handed is which direction you're coming from. but usually most people are going to find it more intuitive to work from the dominant hand away. So you'd be going behind the threads away from your dominant hand. You can experiment and find out which one's more comfortable for you, but most of the time that's going to be the case. If you want to experiment with it going the other way, what I've actually done here is just flip the loom around. So I'm actually still working in the same area as I was before, but I'm working with the loom turned backwards. So it's the back of the loom is towards me. Again, always remember passing over that thread to create the little loop. That's what's going to tighten it down and hold those threads together. So the only other thing that you'll need to know how to do is when you get to the end of your work, you're going to have to do a finishing piece here. Now for mine, I only had 6 threads left, and a lot of times this will happen where you'll be doing in bundles of 3 and maybe you'll have 5, something like that. Divide them however is going to be fairly even. So in this case, I'm going to do 2 bundles of 3. So I'm going to be going behind 3 and up 2 instead of behind 4 and up 2. So I'm going to do one more little regular hem stitch here, and then I'm ready to do my edge hem stitch. So we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to be coming just straight out the side of the work. When we wrap around here, again, we're going to be going over that thread, and that's what's going to create our little ending hem stitch. Now, if this is the same color as your warp, sometimes what I'll do is actually just plunge it down through the loop I just created, and that'll tighten around it and actually hold it really nicely. But in this case, we've got something that's a contrasting color, and I don't want it to do that. So what I'm actually going to do is take this and needle weave it in where we've been doing around the hem stitching, just to lock it into place. So you see I'll kind of trace where the thread went before. It's going to go over, under, over, under. In this case, since it's already been hem stitched, it's a little easier to just catch one thread at a time. But I'll do that 2 or 3 times is usually good enough to secure it. So again, just follow where one of the weft picks is, and then you can just leave a little tail hanging out. Don't worry too much about cutting this right now. I would just sort of trim it enough so it's out of your way, and then once you've finished the piece and washed it, you can cut it flush with the work, and it'll be pretty invisible. So that's it. That's all you need to do, and you've got your perfect little hem stitch finished.